With the lead up to Final Fantasy 16 getting shorter and shorter as the days go by, I figured that now is the best time for us to take a trip down memory lane and look at iconic final boss battles across the Final Fantasy franchise and take a trip down memory lane through all aspects of the franchise before the new entry hits. Hello there everybody, welcome beautiful, my name is Joesephyr and welcome to my top 10 list of final bosses across Final Fantasy games, obviously prior to Final Fantasy 16. Now, neither you nor I particularly likes long intros, so let's get stuck in and get into it. So we're going to start all the way down at number 10, and number 10 is going to be Neo Exdeath. Now, Neo Exdeath is the first final boss on this list that is split into multiple parts, unless of course you count the 3D remake of Cloud of Darkness in the DS version of Final Fantasy 3, with each part assaulting the party separately and all four needing to be taken down in order to win. Now, Exdeath is also one of the nastier bosses on this list thanks to his use of status ailments and large-scale signature attacks like Almagest and Grand Cross. Now, Final Fantasy V is a very breakable game, so it's easy to overpower him if you know how, but his grotesque appearance and barrage style of combat make him a noteworthy entry here. At number 9 we have the Final Fantasy IV final boss, Xeromus. So Final Fantasy IV makes really good use of scripted scenes in combat scenarios, with particular mentions to the Golbez fight and Rydia turning up and the fight against Zemus with Golbez and Fusoya, and Xeromus exemplifies this well with his first incorporeal form, but after Cecil uses the crystal given to him by Golbez, Xeromus takes physical form and starts assaulting the party with heavy magic, and spamming his signature move, Big Bang, like it was going out of fashion. Xeromus has quirky qualities that make him noteworthy, such as the ability to steal dark matter from him, which does absolutely nothing, and the ability to weaken his assaults by returning fire with well-timed magic of your own while he's shaking in order to make his stats a little bit weaker. So watch out for those shakes, because they're going to cause some big damage unless you know what you're doing. At number 8 we have Cloud of Darkness. Now, Cloud of Darkness takes note here by being arguably the most difficult final boss in any numbered Final Fantasy, and is also the first instance in a Final Fantasy game of an unwinnable fight in the lead up to the final showdown. Unwinnable with a boss fight anyway, you do have the opening to Final Fantasy 2. In the 2D version of FF3, she only actually uses one move apart from her physical attacks, which is Particle Beam, but it hits really hard, and she likes using it a heck of a lot. And it's even worse in the 3D version of Final Fantasy 3, where she adds multiple actions per turn, thanks to her having her tentacles being party members for her, as well as buffing herself and the dreaded bad breath being added into the mix. Cloud of Darkness is not one to be trifled with in any version of the games that she's in. At number 7 we have Chaos, the first and original final boss of the franchise, being in the original Final Fantasy. Chaos brings hefty magic, nasty physical attacks, and the ability to heal himself if you aren't fast enough, making for a fitting end to the very first Final Fantasy game. He follows a strict pattern for his abilities in most versions of Final Fantasy 1, which makes him easier to deal with. Unless of course you're playing the Pixel Remaster version, where his patterns are a bit more random, so you kind of just have to hope that he doesn't cast haste on himself too early and make his physical attacks unbelievably strong. Now, a special mention here goes out to Darkness Manifest, which is a reimagining of Chaos in Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin, where he's given a lot of similar abilities, and the story plays out very similarly to how it does next to Garland with Jack Garland, so Chaos is just an icon of the franchise, so it would be remiss to not mention him here. Now moving into some of the 3D games here, at number 6 we have Altamesia. So Final Fantasy VIII's final boss is one to remember in terms of numerous phases in a single fight, but each of these phases of Altamesia is memorable in their own way. After beating the sorceress herself in her most regular form, she then summons Griever from Squall's mind in order to assault him with his own kind of apprehensions and the physicality of his own inhibitions. And then, after you've beaten Griever, she then junctions Griever onto herself to become a hulking beast. And then after that one's beaten, you then find that she casts off her mortal coil to show her true Eldritch-esque form, which is a pattern that you often see amongst Final Fantasy final bosses. They're always some kind of horrible looking being, or quite the opposite, as we'll get into in later entries. With signature moves like Shockwave Pulsar, Great Attractor, and Apocalypse peppering the various stages of the fight, this final boss tells a miniature story all on its own. At number 5 we have Bonavasa, the god of the Final Fantasy XIII universe. Now Bonavasa doesn't actually show his face until the end of Lightning Returns. Lightning challenges God himself, wielding a huge scythe and merging into the landscape itself, making for easily the most epic fight across all 3 of the Final Fantasy XIII games. Now Bonavasa has a hefty amount of time to stagger and has a gargantuan amount of health and attacks peppering every stage of the fight, whether he's in bird form or, as I say, merged into the floor. But seeing Lightning coming to the climactic end of her journey is a reward 3 games in the making. Now this next entry doesn't come from a numbered Final Fantasy, similarly to Lightning Returns, even though Bonavasa is very much the capstone of the 13 trilogy. And at number 4 I have Feral Chaos, who is the final boss of Dissidia Duodecim. Now, obviously being an offshoot of the original Chaos, Feral Chaos is quite a cheeky one in that he actually shows his face right at the start of the game to cocky players who think they already know everything there is to know about Dissidia and teaches them a pretty painful lesson very quickly. And by the time the player returns to face him at the very end of the game, Feral Chaos is honestly not much easier to deal with lightning fast strikes and a combo game that's enough to make the player pull their hair out. He's a true test of your reflexes, you might say. At number 3 we have Sephiroth. Now, Sephiroth is an icon, he is the legend, he is a moment, but Sephiroth in particular is a sight to behold, with the opening notes of One Winged Angel and the image of this angelic figure with very un-angelic intentions descending onto the stage sets up the climax of one of the most influential games of all time. Supernova, his signature attack, is equally iconic, primarily for how long it takes to execute. And ultimately, the fight itself is actually quite easy, but nobody can deny the impact of this fight. Sephiroth in 7 Remake is pretty epic too, but the original took all our breaths away when we first encountered those opening notes of the iconic track. Heartless Angel indeed. Now at number 2, we have Hades. So choosing a final boss from Final Fantasy XIV is challenging, to say the least, primarily because there's technically tons of them depending on what point you start playing Final Fantasy XIV. But the culmination of the 5.0 Shadowbringers storyline, bringing the fan favourite Emmett Selk front and centre to both insult you with a voice like butter and simultaneously become the most sympathetic villain in Final Fantasy history. Check the polls, he is now the most popular character in Final Fantasy history, before taking on the form of Hades is one for the history books. Now I wanted to put the boss of Hatch 5.3 here as well, if you know, you know. But if I had to pick one, I think that most people would agree that Hades is the one to pick here. Before we go over onto our number 1 slot, and quite honestly, I don't think it's going to come as much as a shock to many Final Fantasy players who've at least played some Final Fantasy games as to who that number 1 slot might be. Please don't forget to check out all of my other links in the description box below, whether it be Twitter, Twitch, Discord, or Patreon. You can join the conversation over on Discord as to what your favourite final bosses in the Final Fantasy franchise might be. Or you can come and support the channel, as many people very, very graciously have done over on Patreon. I do make title cards at the end of all my videos for all of my supporters, as well as a plethora of other benefits. And one of those benefits is a shout out at random from my supporters during every video. And in today's video, that person is going to be Zypress, who has been a supporter for a really long time now, and I'm very, very grateful for everyone who comes along to the channel and just watches or gets something out of what I make. It's very gratifying for me, and I'd love to continue to do it for you guys. Obviously, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel and click the bell for notification of future videos, as we all know what a battle the algorithm on YouTube can be, certainly when your content has changed up a little bit from what it previously was. So if you would like to do that, you'd be helping me out a great deal. Thank you very, very much, and let's get on to that number 1 slot. Now for that number 1 slot, we have the one, the only Kefka. Could it really have been anyone else? The music, the art direction, the narration prior to the fight and during the fight. This fight is a masterclass in using gameplay to tell a story. Similarly to Sephiroth, the fight's actually not that hard. It's not the most challenging in the world, except for the attack he shares with the aforementioned icon, Heartless Angel, which puts your party to 1 HP. But this opera of a boss fight has a vast array of fan interpretations for its symbolisms, whether it's to do with the Divine Comedy, or the different stages of grief, or the different stages of Kefka's personality throughout the fight. But its symbolism, its connection to the track Dancing Mad will never be forgotten by the Final Fantasy fandom at large, and this is why I think very, very strongly that Dancing Mad, I say Dancing Mad because it's the track that gets me going, but Kefka, the final boss of Final Fantasy VI, is the single best Final Fantasy final boss out there. So that's it for today's video. Let me know in the comments below what your favourite final boss fight in Final Fantasy history has been. Do you think that whoever the final boss of Final Fantasy XVI turns out to be, that it will be a contender for this? Perhaps you felt that Arden was a stronger pick, or perhaps somebody from one of the spin-offs of Final Fantasy, perhaps X9 Bahamut from World of Final Fantasy is your pick. Let me know in the comments below, and let me know what other top 10s you'd like to see from me with regards to Final Fantasy, because actually I've discovered I really enjoy making them and it's kind of fun. So let me know what kind of subject matters you'd like to see, and thank you ever so much for watching, beautiful. I will see you in the next video. Take care.